All right. Well, hello and welcome, everyone. You are in the webinar on Passkeys, what you should know about UMBC's implementation journey. Thanks so much for joining us for today's IAM Online. This is our monthly webinar focused on identity and access management, brought to you by InCommon and Internet2. My name is Jean Horszewski. I'm the InCommon Academy Director, and I will be your host today. So just to get us started, we'll review a little bit of our agenda. We welcome you. We will have some introductions of our speakers today, followed by the presentation, and a chance for some Q&A before we finally close. So just as a reminder, we will be taking questions live. We're going to use the Zoom Q&A function. So please send your questions and your comments using that function, and we will be addressing your questions and comments during that portion of our program today. But you're also free to post messages in the chat that will be available to everybody. Just be sure that you select the everyone in the drop-down menu. And just as a reminder, this event is being recorded. So if you registered for IAM Online, you will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides. But we also do post this on our InCommon website as well as our YouTube channel. So be on the lookout for that. All right, so I am now happy to pass the virtual mic over to our moderator, James Crampton, our Trust and Identity Industry Relationship Manager at Internet2. He'll introduce our speakers as well as today's topic. So, James, take it away.
Thank you, Jean, and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending today's IAM Online, where we are going to be discussing passkeys in the higher ed context, in particular with University of Maryland, Baltimore County's Paul Riddle, who will be presenting their portion of the community end of things, what it's like to have to implement this in a higher ed context. But first, to orient us to the questions and context of passkeys is Drew Capener, who's a software engineer with Omnibond, who is a Catalyst partner with InCommon. Our InCommon Catalyst partners are consultants who can help higher ed institutions with their IAM challenges. So I'd like to turn it over to Drew now for our introductions to passkeys.
So before we get into the meat of this, we wanted to just give you a little bit of a roadmap for today. So I'm going to start out talking about the world we're living in right now, the predominant authentication method being passwords. And then I'll talk about how passkeys address some of the main pitfalls we see today. And then I'll close just mentioning and describing a little bit the project that I've been working on, which is OmniPasskey. I'll let Paul describe what he's going to do.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Paul Riddle, UMBC. My main thing was I was going to talk about sort of how do you get started with passkeys if you already have thousands of users using passwords. How do you kind of kick the water on the new, or kick the tires on the new technology, so to speak? You know, onboarding your users, things like that, and how OmniPasskey has sort of given us a path to do that. So that's basically me. Go ahead, Drew.
All right. So as I was thinking about, you know, our life authenticating with passwords, I couldn't help but think of it in a comical way. So I think we really have a toxic relationship with passwords. And I know it's kind of a trope that when you break things off with someone, you say that, you know, it's not you, it's me. But in this case, it actually is us. And I'll kind of explain why. So we do all sorts of terrible things with passwords. First off, when we create them, we're frequently doing the bare minimum. It's pretty common to see people use password as their password. I would have thought this would finally have ended, but apparently last year in a survey, Bitwarden found that 19% of people were willing to admit to using password as their password. We also forget about passwords. I think at this point, a lot of us just plan on, you know, using the reset flow at some point. It's too hard to memorize all of them. And then we two-time them. We are notorious for reusing the same set of credentials across a whole bunch of different online accounts. And Statista in 2021 found that 21% of people said they always use the same credentials. So those are the people that use only the same set everywhere they go, not to mention people reusing here and there. And passwords aren't even safe with us. We do really crazy things like store them in clear text and write them down on sticky notes next to our desk. In 2023, only 34% of people said they used a password manager. So the protection of passwords is really poor. We also have some really serious trust issues with passwords. We're constantly going behind their back with MFA because we don't actually trust passwords to really authenticate our users. So we had to create this whole alternative method to bolster the authentication we're doing. But really the worst thing from a security point of view that we do with passwords is betray them. We are all too willing to give away our passwords to people and sites that really shouldn't have them. And phishing is the #1 source of cyber attacks today. So that's why I say I think this is really the worst thing. And that takes an especially dark turn when you realize that a lot of ransomware starts with phishing. In this CU Times survey, they found that 75% of ransomware at credit unions had started with phishing. For us in higher education, the cost of a ransomware attack can be astronomical. EduCause in 2023 had that number at 1.42 million. So I think I've made my case well enough here. I think it's time to break things off with passwords and start a new relationship with an authentication method that we can really love. So passkeys are the way that I think we can achieve that. So what I have here is a really rudimentary, very, very simplified representation of the setup that's required to do authentication with passkeys. So essentially, when you set up a passkey, or to use the language from the standard, register a passkey, you're creating, using the user's device, an asymmetric key pair, and the user's device retains the private key from that key pair and shares the public key with the server. In this case, that public key is going to be stored inside the university's database. So that's how you set things up for passkey authentication. And then I have yet again another dramatically simplified representation of the protocol that is then used. So essentially what happens is the university is going to create a challenge, which is basically going to be a random string that they're going to send over to the user's device, where the user is going to give essentially fulfill a test of their presence. So usually that's going to mean a biometric nowadays. It may also mean they're using their PIN, their screen lock PIN, to unlock their device and enable the use of their private key to sign the challenge that was sent to them, which gets sent back to the university so that that signature can be verified. So that's how authentication happens with a passkey at a very high level. So passkeys get us a few really key benefits that eliminate a lot of the pitfalls we were talking about when we were talking about passwords. So one of the things that passkeys bring are device or cloud managed credentials. So when you create a passkey, it's either going to live on the user's device or be synced and managed via the user's cloud account with one of the hyperscalers. We're talking about Apple, Google, Microsoft. And so offloading the management of the credentials from the user to these professionals brings some benefits. For one, there's no opportunity left for the user to create a bad credential, like using password for their password. This also eliminates a whole class of user experience challenges associated with asking users to memorize dozens and sometimes hundreds of passwords. There's also not an opportunity for users to do credential reuse. Every credential is unique to the service that it's used for. And then again, because you've offloaded, you've taken away from the user that job of managing their own credentials, you're getting a professional grade of credential protection. Of course, there's always risks, especially when you're talking about things being stored in the cloud. But compared to the credential management methods we see users using, I feel much more comfortable having professionals do that work. Another thing that passkeys give us is two factors in one. So you're getting two authentication factors in one step. And usually that's going to be something you have and something you are. Because in order to use a passkey, you need to have possession of the passkey, meaning you need to possess the device that has access or houses the passkey. And you also need to prove your presence to that device using a biometric, or in some cases, something like a PIN. So what this means is that your second factor app is now really your third factor. Now, different organizations are going to make their own judgments about what this means for them, whether they're going to drop that MFA app or keep it. And I think Paul is going to talk a little bit about that and where the rubber meets the road there. But obviously, you're stepping up security quite a bit this way. The other huge thing that passkeys give us is domain scoped credentials. So a passkey cannot be used by any site other than the one it was created and intended for. And that's built into the standard. That's not reliant on the user mediating that themselves. So that, of course, is going to solve our phishing problem, because we can no longer have someone pretending to be YouTube, asking for your YouTube credentials and getting them just because they were able to convince you they were YouTube. So one of the questions that comes up anytime we're looking at a new technology is, how far along is this? Is it ready to go? And nowadays, with passkeys, we're actually in a really good place. We've got robust support from basically all of the major platforms in terms of both browsers and operating systems. And this, list of logos is not exhaustive in any way, but it gives a sense of how broad the support is. So for us in higher education, the question then becomes, how do we do passkeys within the trusted access platform? And what I've been working on as an engineer is one of the ways that you can do that. So OmniPasskey is basically a system that allows you to do passkeys with Shibboleth. So I have kind of a very simple diagram to lay out for you piece by piece the components of this system that we've built and how it works. So the first component of this system is a Shibboleth plugin that enables the authentication flow for passkeys. And here you'll see what that looks like inside of a Shibboleth login. So you can see it's a very simple way to log in. The user, from their perspective, is basically just seeing their device prompting them for, a fingerprint in that case. So the OmniPasskey plugin, which does authentication, talks to the passkey store, which is basically just going to be whatever database the organization we're dealing with prefers to use. And then, unfortunately, using passkeys isn't just as simple as making authentication work. There ends up being some back-end work and administration that has to happen. So for that, and this is the part that I've worked quite a bit on, we've built the OmniPasskey management console. So the management console has two pieces. There's a self-serve console, and this part is aimed at end users, allowing them to manage their own passkeys. So end users can come into the management console and register their own passkeys, as you can see me doing here in this demo. And users can also use the management console to delete or decommission passkeys when they don't need them anymore. Another thing that users can do in the management console is view their account history. So they can see their past authentications, when passkeys were created and deleted, and so on and so forth. This just allows users to mediate their own security and privacy a little bit. So the bulk of the management console is the administrative piece. And this allows your campus administrators to do the things that they need to do to make passkeys work on your campus. So the first of those things is managing passkeys globally. So here you can see administrators are able to actually search for and find passkeys, delete them, inspect them, and so on and so forth. We also enable detailed log exploration for your administrators. So OmniPasskey produces very detailed logs of all the actions that are performed within the platform. And as an administrator, you can search through all of that and work inside of it here. And then we've also built a dashboard that allows administrators to track usage and adoption across the campus. Obviously, the numbers you're seeing here aren't too exciting because this is my demo instance. But you can see how, especially as Paul starts talking, when you're rolling something like this out, it's good to be able to get an understanding of how the rollout is going. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Paul at this point.
So our journey. So if you've been to TechX, or if you've seen some of these previous IAMs, maybe in the past couple of years or so, you probably heard some buzz about the use of passkeys in higher ed. There have been some early adopter schools that have kind of rolled their own solutions for passkeys and gotten them working in their environments. I know Duke was one, I think UNC was another, and there may have been a couple others that have maybe presented in these sort of forums. But overall, kind of gotten the sense that passkeys haven't really taken hold in higher ed yet. But there's a lot of interest since they're getting popular elsewhere. But the reason being that there just hasn't really been a tool available to make them easily deployable if you're not an early adopter kind of school with resources to kind of dedicate to development. So UMBC, we're not early adopters. We have a relatively small IAM staff. So I was kind of thinking, as I was kind of going over in my head what I was going to talk about here, what do we really bring to the table? Well, maybe that's what we bring to the table. We're really not early adopters. We're sort of the first, maybe part of the first wave of people to roll this out more widely. Because with OmniPasskey, we now have sort of this tool to facilitate it without having to do a lot of our own development. And the other thing with schools is higher ed, education people tend to be conservative with things as far as rollouts of new technology. And a lot of times, and we're no exception here, when we have a big, exciting new technology like this, we like to kind of get in slowly and maybe not turn it loose on the entire campus population at once, sort of test the water, see how it goes. And we had to kind of figure out what our strategy was going to be along those lines, and how we were going to be able to do that with a technology like this, because it does pose some interesting challenges since it's an authentication platform, which I'll get into a little later. So anyway, that's kind of what I was going to talk about, is how do you kind of like deploy this on a smaller scale before you roll it out all the way. So let me figure out my slide focus here. There we go. Okay, so this is sort of the obligatory slide that everything starts off with. Is our environment is that we have a homegrown user account generation system. And the reason I mention that is because eventually down the road, the account generation system is really going to play an important role in passkey deployment, because eventually we're going to want to have people generate passkeys when they first become associated with the university and create their accounts. And the thing is, right now they're not. So you have a large number of people who are using, already here, and they don't have passkeys. How do you get them using passkeys relatively easily? Our environment's Shibboleth IDP with tap containers, so that made OmniPasskey a great fit for us. And right now, our second factor is Duo. And you'll see at the fourth bullet point there, we're only using, or actually the third and fourth bullet points, we're only using Duo for what I would call tightly affiliated people like students, faculty, and staff. Right now, our alumni, guest contractors, prospective students, admits, people like that are not using MFA. And the main reason for that has been money. So now I'm a technical person, and I'm not really privy to a lot of the actual dollar figures around what our Duo contract entails, but I have been told that adding all of these thousands and thousands of alumni who might not necessarily use the system very frequently to our Duo license is not cost effective. But we do need something to secure these accounts better, as I will get into later. So among these sort of groups, I'm going to kind of single out alumni because that's kind of the group we've chosen to focus on. So I'm going to talk a little more about that. So we have alumni. We're a university. We have a lot of alumni. Some of them log in, some of them never log in. But for the most part, the average alum will occasionally log in to do various business with the university. Donations are very, very important for, goes without saying. We let alumni keep their email accounts pretty much indefinitely. So they'll use our SSO system to do that, the people that choose to do that. And then order trans, pretty much general the stuff that alumni just do. And like I say, some of them never come back. Others do. Others will leave for a long time, which could potentially be years, and then come back later and want to do business with the university again. And in particular with these people, they're using usernames and passwords to log in. They might have a password that's 5 years old that they've forgotten. Everything goes stale over time online, which is kind of a given these days. And since they don't have MFA, you kind of can see where this is going. These accounts tend to get hacked and phished. I don't have the exact numbers, but I think a very significant percentage of our phished and hacked accounts with these sort of loosely affiliated people like alumni and things like that. So we need to do something about that. And another problem with that is sometimes these accounts that have been around for years and years, right now we have a pretty good automated password reset process, but that involves things like security questions and things like that we store in our IAM. And a lot of these older accounts predate when we started doing that. So these people end up, they want to get back in, they have to call us, they have to talk to our support staff, and it's just a sort of a pain. People are thinking, why do we have to do this? Any other service I can go on online and reset my password, blah, blah, blah. And I have to call and talk to somebody, heaven forbid. So anyway, we were wondering if there was a better way to address this. And then we were also sort of becoming privy to passkeys as a technology at around the same time. So we ended up putting two and two together. And it's like, well, can we use alumni as kind of our guinea pigs, so to speak, for passkeys? Maybe we can get alumni using passkeys, and then we won't have this problem with their accounts getting phished. And by the same token, we don't have to spend a lot of money to enroll them in our Duo license. So kind of a win-win on both fronts there. But as you can see there, I say not an instant win, because there's a certain amount of groundswell that needs to happen before you get yourself into this situation, because they're alums, they have old passwords that they're not going to have a passkey in the system, although we want them to use one. But to register one, it's like the chicken and egg thing. You have to all get in by some other way, and then you have to enroll it via the self-service app. So passwords, at least for a while, are still going to be around, although it will start to take care of itself as we get people onboarded earlier in their tenure with the university. Some of this repeats a little bit what I've said. As Drew said earlier, passkeys are sort of two factors in one, so to speak. So you kind of don't need the additional second factor with them. But people have to register them before you can really take advantage of that. And down the road, the plan is to bake this into our account creation, but it's not there yet. So we got to thinking about this, and we kind of said, well, we need to get all these people in. What if, initially, not permanently, what if we were to set up passkeys as sort of an alternative second factor authentication to Duo? And there's a lot of things to kind of like about that. I mean, it's not a perfect solution, but it does solve some of our early onboarding issues. Because number one, it's easy to do with Shibboleth because of the MFA authentication flow. Shibboleth provides a pretty intuitive way to, along with plenty of examples, to, particularly for Duo, to build that into the MFA authentication flow. And you can kind of build a script that chooses which type of second factor you want to use for which user. Because one of the problems with using passkeys as a primary factor is if you're not using it for everybody in your entire population, then you somehow have to figure out what type of authentication they're using before they've authenticated. So it's another chicken and egg thing. So with two-factor, we solve that problem because they'll have, before we send them into the passkey flow, they'll have already done the first factor, which is username, password. So we'll know who they are. And then we can say, oh, is this a Duo person or is this a passkey person? So, and then we can kind of like direct their login kind of like that. And of course, it's cost effective because that way we have a second factor that's not adding seats to our Duo license. And you see disadvantages there at the bottom. It really, doing that really doesn't solve a lot of our problems. It is going to cut down on phishing because you'll have a second factor to prevent that, but you're not really taking advantage of what passkeys are capable of doing if you're kind of pushing them down to a second factor, because you see it's kind of redundant. The user experience, particularly on mobile, whereas mobile you get accustomed to, if you have an Apple device, just logging into services with Face ID. which if you're using Passkey as your primary factor, you can do. It's really cool. You can kind of like just use Face ID, log into your whatever your SSO service is. But if you're using it as a second factor, you're kind of like still having to enter username and password. So it's not great. But the idea is this is sort of only a temporary thing to sort of get us going. So, sort of continuing with that thought, getting down to the more technical details, how does the onboarding work? Like if I'm an alum and I go and I enter my username and password, but I haven't registered a passkey yet, how does that work? And this is one of the things that Duo is very good at, right? They have sort of a baked-in onboarding process. They handle everything. We just send them off to Duo, and if Duo sees that they're not registered, they walk them through their little, workflow that gets them to get, they register their phone or register their YubiKey or whatever they want to do. Really easy, really seamless, and that's why Duo costs a lot of money. So ideally, we want Passkey to work the same way. So if somebody logs in and we want them to use Passkey, but they don't have a Passkey registered, we want to automatically take them to the onboarding, the sort of Passkey management interface that Drew was demoing earlier and have them register one. So it's not quite as automatic as Duo, but using some of the functionality that built into Shibboleth, it's not that hard to sort of do that. And part of that's because unlike with Duo, we kind of own this app, so we can tie it in anywhere. We can have Shib do it. We can have our account creation process do it. So it gives us some flexibility more so than Duo, at the expense of just a little bit more initial configuration. So let me see what we got here. So we have two classes of users, right? We have people that are already here with the university, and we have people that are just coming on who are new to the university, new staff, new students. But first of all, before we even think about them, what do we do with the people that are already here using passwords, and we want to get them starting to look at passkeys? So OmniPasskey gives you a sort of a little example where you can set up an IDP attribute that pulls out the status from the Passkey database and populates this attribute with a flag that says, okay, this person has a passkey registered, this key doesn't. So we can then, as part of one of the IDP's login flow, we can key off that attribute, and if it's not there, we stop the login and we have them go ahead and go in and do that. So in our initial use case, where we're using it as a second factor, we can do that in the MFA flow, where Shib gives you the option to set up a custom authentication event, and we can have it flag that event if the passkey needs to be enrolled, and then it'll send them, pull up a dialogue and send them off to the enrollment interface. So we do that with Duo right now with Refed's MFA service. If somebody tries to log into a service that's asking for Refeds and they're not enrolled in Duo, we have a custom authentication event that says, hey, stop here, go sign up for Duo before you go to use the service. So it would work the same way. And so if once we get to the point where we're using it, passkeys as our first primary factor, we just do it via a Shibboleth intercept flow, like context check. So they'll log in and it'll send them there that way. Oops, lost my focus again. All right, so new users, this is more of a conceptual thing. We haven't gotten to this point yet. But we need to get people creating passkeys when they first join the university. And this is where I say this is where things get interesting. The actual technical process isn't interesting. All we do is we have, like I said earlier, we have a custom account onboarding process. So we'll just plug into there after they've set everything else up, we'll send them over to enroll a passkey, and that'll be that. So that'll start getting the new users in. But where it gets interesting is conceptually, if somebody's registering a passkey when they first join the university, do they then really need a username or password at all? And the answer to that is, I don't quite know yet, but 10 years from now, it could very well be no. I suspect currently people are still going to need usernames and passwords for certain things, like particularly if they need shell access to like a, instructional server or something like that. But I think for most web-based things, we're going to get to a point relatively soon where we don't even need username and passwords. So at that point, that's what I call our end game for passkeys. And that's where I'm hoping we'll get at some point in the next few years. So summing up, temporarily using passkeys as a second factor will help get people on board. And we're talking about doing it initially with alumni, but using it as part of SHIB's MFA flow lets us sort of slowly widen that to larger populations over time. So maybe we want to see how it goes with alumni for a while and then maybe roll it out to students. Because as we found in general, students seem to be willing to sort of take on new technology and kick the tires with it. So they might be sort of a larger focus group once we get to that point. But it's easy to do that if you're using it as a second factor, because all you need to do is sort of make a little tweak to the IDM and flag the Shib IDP to send them to Passkeys versus Duo. So obviously there's some stuff that we need to hash out to make it as seamless as possible. But we'll get there. And then at some point, we hope to, at least for a significant portion of our population, make it our primary authentication method. So we'll see how it goes. And I don't know if we'll ever completely get away from passwords in my, lifespan of my career. But maybe, 10, 20 years down the road, we'll be able to do that, maybe sooner. So and then you'll see, this is just a quick slide sort of with our timeline where it pertains to how we've rolled out OmniPasskey. We've had it running in development since the beginning of this year. Right now, we're still in sort of a limited test group just to make sure that it's working for everybody. And this alumni rollout that I've been talking about for most of the presentation, we're anticipating doing sometime in the next several weeks. So that's the idea. And then we're kind of doing this same song and dance at TechX this year in December. So I'm hoping to have some interesting new stuff to report from that at TechX, and we'll see how that goes. Wish us luck. And then 2025 would be sort of our goal for making it available to the entire population optionally as a second factor. So I think that is me. So I'm going to put it on there. So anyway, we'll leave this up for a few minutes. This is if you want to get in contact with us, but I think that is that for me. So is it Gene I'm handing it back off to, or?
Well, we're going to hand it back over to James.
Yeah, I can take it up.
Yeah, okay.
Take it from here, Paul.
Cool.
Yeah, so appreciate that, Paul and Drew. That was some great content. I really appreciate seeing both, the provider side and the community side from that. So we have about a dozen questions, so we'll kind of jump right into them. And we'll start with one for Drew, and that is, are you saying that to take advantage of the security that passkeys allow, that we need to do away with passwords and only allow passkeys to our accounts? And I think we addressed this during the course of the conversation, but it's an important point, so I think it's worth going into. So on that topic of, do you see this fully replacing usernames and passwords, or is there a phased or joint approach?
I can jump in. I think, what we heard from Paul just about end game. Yeah, we'd love to see this as the authentication method. But it's going to take a bit to get there. And I guess if your passwords are backed with MFA, you're going to have MFA on those passwords. So that should be a significant help. But from a user experience point of view, ultimately, I think you want to get to passkeys. And even from a kind of an account recovery point of view, it would really be good to eliminate the operational overhead that comes from having users manage their own credentials. I don't know if Paul has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think you summed that up pretty well. Yeah, I mean, I think there's still a lot of, since they're so new in higher ed, it hasn't really been hashed out yet as far as like, are passkeys sufficient to satisfy something like Refed's MFA? And I'm sure that those are things we're going to be addressing in the coming years as more people start using them. But yeah, like I say, it's such a new technology that a lot of these things are still sort of up in the air.
I'll actually throw in there as well. I think when passkeys were initially sort of coming out, they were assigned to the authentication assurance level 1. But as they're being further developed and people are becoming more comfortable with the standard, I have heard that they will be moved up to AAL2. I don't know if that's already happened, if there's a date for when it happens, or I don't know the details there, but there's talk of that.
Great, thanks, guys. Moving on, how do you deal with users that are unwilling to use personal devices for passkeys? Are you purchasing thousands of dollars worth of hardware tokens or requiring users to re-enroll on each device?
I'll say, I'll jump in, and we're not at that point with passkeys yet, but we have seen that with Duo. So we have we've been down this road. And this isn't really an answer, but we haven't had a whole lot of users who have been unwilling to use, but the ones that have been rather vocal. So we've been sort of treating them one-off and buying. I think we bought Duo keys for some of these. So some people also use, don't want to use push notifications for Duo, so they use the telephone credits and things like that, which obviously that's not going to work with passkeys. But I guess that's one of those things, like, to be determined. Are we really going to see like users who don't want to use personal device, numbers of those types of users to the point where we're spending an untenable amount of money on passkeys to hand out to people? And I don't know. I don't really know the answer to the question yet. So we'll kind of take that as it comes, I guess, is the best I can say.
Sounds like a stay tuned kind of situation.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be people in that situation. So especially maybe some larger universities and things like that.
Right. Okay. Moving on to our next. In your passkey login acceptor, the IDP, are you able to disallow cloud synced passkeys and only allow hardware-based passkeys?
Yeah, so we haven't built that yet, kind of because of the point that was just brought up about what it would look like to buy a bunch of hardware. But it's something we can build if the demand is there for it. Obviously right now it's very much triaging what people need now.
Right, thanks. Next up, can you use passkeys and as an alternative to a commercial MFA vendor like Duo? As in, have the user continue to use a password, but use a passkey as an MFA check? And I think, Paul, you described this in your part.
Yeah, that's our goal. And we're actually working on that right now. The one little technical kind of hiccup we've run into with that is with the IDP, with the authentication principle, ends up with 2 authentication principles in the result. So I was trying to plug it in place of Duo, and it didn't work immediately because of that. So we have to get past that little hump. But other than that, I think that'll be relatively straightforward to work around. But I just, on the technical side of things, haven't done it yet. But yeah, that's exactly our intent, is how we're going to roll it out to alumni.
Right, great. Another question, what's the recovery or reset process for inaccessible passkeys because of lost or broken devices?
I guess I'll frame this a little bit and then hand it over to Paul for his perspective from a campus point of view. This is a big reason why the FIDO Alliance ultimately moved to passkeys, which are technically passkeys are the synced credentials that can be, managed by your cloud provider, your cloud-backed password manager, that kind of thing. So to frame this, I think that problem in general becomes a lot smaller because of that fact, right? In most cases, you're going to have a user putting this passkey in their iCloud, in their Google account, in their Microsoft account. And ideally, you have them do 2 of those. So they'd have to lose access to Apple and Microsoft in order to not be able to get into their account. So you can see how you can really shrink the amount of recovery that you have to do with that, but that doesn't mean there will be none. So I'm curious what Paul's point of view would be in terms of how you might approach that.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing to see as we start to get more people joining, and I don't really have an answer for it yet. But I do like the idea of storing passkeys in the cloud chains, because people tend not, once it's backed up in the cloud, it tends to be a little bit harder to lose. But so.
Well, I think there's another kind of tightly related question here about, does the process support device-bound or syncable passkeys or both?
Yeah, so
go ahead. you can take this better.
I mean, you can use device-bound or syncable with it. Does that answer the question?
Well, I guess the question really is do you have support for both device-bound or syncable passkeys, or are they really, is there a difference in this context?
Yeah, there ends up not being a significant difference unless, like the previous questioner, you want to delineate between the 2. But yeah, users could elect to use either.
Okay, so it's supported. It's a question of policy and what the institution is doing. Okay. Let's see. Next up, have you heard of anyone in higher ed using Duo Passkeys as the IDP rather than Shib or Entra in widespread production?
I'm aware of it, but I'm not aware of people using it in production. I think Shib team the consortium relatively recently came out with the plugin that lets you use Duo as the primary factor. I'm not sure what kind of adoption they've seen with that, but yeah, that's another potential vector to get into passkeys.
Great. Let's see. How about this is a more general question, but probably in your camp, Paul. I'm always curious to hear about the size of IAM teams at other universities. We at Oregon State have 4 people managing 50,000 users, so about 12,500 per staffer. Paul characterized use of UMBC's teams as relatively small. So what is small?
Well, we probably have fewer fewer users per IDM staff than Oregon. I can't divide in my head, but we're we always characterize ourselves as medium sized. Probably around 15,000 would be our community size, and we have I'd say 2.5 IDM people, full-time, 2 full-time, 1 sort of 50-60%. So relatively small, but and that sort of gets to the whole thing with Passkeys, with being able to support them, and where OmniPasskey has sort of been a good value to us is because we don't really have development staff to dedicate towards the piece of the puzzle that requires the most development, which is the admin and registration web interface. So that's the big value add that OmniPasskey adds for us, being a relatively small staff.
Right, but I think that's also part of the challenge in higher ed, is that the surrounding infrastructure, the staff that you have supporting the IAM team in various ways, determines a lot of how effective they can be in terms of the sheer numbers. So it's a difficult question to answer. So next we have a question on how will new device registration occur? Are you assuming device vendor consistency, like Apple migrates with a device change? And are there any concerns about passkeys being provided by managers that have backup and recovery based simply on control of a personal email?
So there was a couple of questions there, right? One was sort of about vendor support, more or less, and compatibility. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, and specifically to device registration.
To device registration. I'm not sure I totally understand the question. Can you repeat that?
Yeah. So it says, how will device registration occur? Are you assuming device vendor consistency, e.g. Apple migrates with device change or loss?
Yeah, okay. I'll do my best to answer this. It's a little fuzzy for me still. And if whoever asked wants to clarify, we can circle back too. So it's interesting with passkeys, you had Apple, Microsoft, and Google agree to support this standard together, and that doesn't mean there's not a good amount of jockeying going on behind the scenes of them, kind of arguing about how this works. But that agreement does mean we can pretty much assume consistency. I think that's the question. Let's see.
Right.
Assume I lost my phone and that I choose to replace with a different vendor phone. Oh yeah, okay. So if you lost your phone and you're replacing it with a different vendor phone, you're not going to be able to move those passkeys right now. I think that's one of the things that's in flux with the specification is, could there be some sort of capacity to move passkeys from one keychain, so to speak, to another? But in the case where you want to replace it with a device from another vendor, you're just going to be creating a wholly different passkey with that other vendor.
Okay. We are running low on time, but I'd like to get one more question in. And that is, can you touch on the use of pins versus biometrics? My biggest pushback is that we require complex passwords, but pins can be simple. So if they could find a way to get past the complex password requirements, is that a comparable security context?
Repeat that one more time for me.
Or can you touch on the use of pins versus biometrics? My biggest pushback is always that we require complex passwords, but pins can be simple.
Yeah, I guess I would say to keep in mind that's not your only authentication factor. The user has to actually have the access to the passkey, meaning have the device that either has access to the associated cloud or holds the credential itself. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Great.
Great. Well, I'm afraid we're about out of time now. We didn't get to quite all the questions, but we hit the major themes here.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hand it back over to Jean now just to wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, everyone. I'm going to share my screen one more time just to wrap us up and close us up here today. Many thanks to Paul and Drew for sharing your experiences about Shibboleth and OmniPasskey. And well, to everyone here attending, for those of you who submitted some questions or just listened in, we definitely appreciate you being here. Today, before we sign off, you've heard a lot about Shibboleth and OmniPasskey. Jennifer is going to post in our chat a link. If you are interested in learning about one or either or both, let us know, because we can follow up with you and give you some more details and that sort of thing. So please click on that link if you want to learn more. A couple other things you should be aware of. We have some more different software trainings coming up this fall. Grouper is coming up in November. But we also have a learning pathway for Midpoint. So if you're new to Midpoint or you've been using it for a while, this learning pathway is definitely something you want to check out because it will augment what you might be already doing or learning for the first time. So follow these links for sure. And as we wrap up today, we sure want to know your thoughts about today's program. So you're going to see a quick little survey once you close out of here. But if you have any specific feedback, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. But if you have other ideas for IAM online topics, whether you want to be a speaker or you want to hear about something, let us know that too. And mark your calendars for next month, October 16th. We have a webinar called 7 Things You Should Do to Improve Your User Security on Eduroam. So we sure hope that you will tune in again there. Special thanks to Jennifer and the Internet 2 team who make this monthly event happen. And I think that wraps us up again. So Paul, Drew, James, thank you again. And thank you everyone for attending today. Have a great day and we will see you next month.